If you are a fan of English soccer, you know that in 2015, Leicester City had 5,000 to 1 odds of winning the Premier League. There were bookmakers that had lower odds on Elvis Presley being found alive. No one expected them to win the league, so it was an amazing triumph when they did win. History has this long list of underdogs that end up winning. When watching the U.S. men's hockey team win the gold earlier this year was great because they kept showing highlights of the last time the U.S. men won the gold in 1980 with the Miracle on Ice, when a bunch of U.S. amateurs beat the heavily favored Soviets. If you're a military historian, you may prefer the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, when a group of vastly outnumbered English troops beat the French and go on to inspire Shakespeare's play Henry V, where Henry gives the famous St. Crispin's Day speech. All of these stories are inspiring, and they connect back to David and Goliath, the original underdog story, where little David, the one whose dad forgot about him when he brought his sons before Samuel, ends up defeating the giant Philistine champion Goliath. One way of listening to the story is the idea that we need to believe harder in ourselves or be brave like David. We certainly should. But I don't think that's why this story is here. The reality of life is that there are giants, that they do threaten us, and we can't defeat all of them on our own. David tells us in verse 47 what the story is really about. He says, "The battle is the Lord's, and he will give our enemies ultimately into our hands." For the setting of the battle, we have the Israelites and the Philistines separated by a valley. Every day for 40 days, Goliath walks into the middle of the valley and issues a challenge to the Israelites. Rather than have the entire armies face off, the Israelite champion would face Goliath in single combat, and whoever loses, their side would serve the other. Now, Goliath is massive. We get 4 verses on how big he is, on how imposing he is, on the description of his armor and how intimidating that is. He's portrayed as invincible. And for 40 days, whenever the Israelites hear this challenge, they are paralyzed in fear. Even Saul. Now remember that Saul is described as being the picture of a leader. He's tall and handsome, head and shoulders taller than everyone else. And even he is petrified, as afraid as everyone else, even though as the king he'd be the natural choice to fight for Israel against Goliath. But fear has silenced him and his entire army. Fear does this. Our vision shrinks. The problems grow in our minds, so that all that is left of the world is the problem, making them larger than they already are. You faced giants like this. You know how bad, how intimidating they are, and how when you focus on nothing else, they seem all the more terrible. The details on each of our giants change, but the experience is the same. We are overwhelmed by them. And then the whole scene shifts. David arrives. He's bringing lunch for his brothers. He's not there to fight. He's not dressed for battle. But he starts asking questions, and he learns about this Goliath. He notices something no one else is paying attention to. Everyone else is so terrified that they're going to be killed, and so their vision is shrunk. But David notices differently. He sees Goliath not just insulting Israel, but defying the living God. Everyone else is focused on the worldly problem, but David looks at it through faith. He doesn't ignore the reality of Goliath. He doesn't ignore the reality of the problem, doesn't pretend that it doesn't exist, but he recognizes that even a giant is not bigger than the living God. Listen to his declaration before Saul. "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight." David is talking about faith. Saul isn't so sure. Saul's been staring at nothing but Goliath for 40 days, thinking of nothing but Goliath for 40 days. He doesn't see a way around this problem. He looks at how small David is. He tells David he's just a youth. Saul's vision is not unlike the disciples in our story from Mark's Gospel today. They're on a boat. They're filled with Jesus in the evening. A storm is coming up. Waves are crashing in the boat. The boat is filling with water. The disciples are terrified. All they see is the water crashing around them. All they see is the water in the bottom of the boat. They wake Jesus, and it's what they say: "Do you not care that we are perishing?" It's not a question of whether they're going to die. The question is, does God care about the fact that it's going to happen? They've given up hope in so many ways. The problems are huge. They cannot see any solution. And when Jesus awakes and rebukes the storm, he asks them a simple question: why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? They were so busy staring at the storm that they weren't looking at Jesus. They're just like Saul staring at the giant. They've given up hope. So David isn't staring at Goliath. David thinks of all the times he fought bears and lions to protect his sheep, and he tells Saul that Goliath shall be like one of the animals he has killed, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. It's just another paw. David believes this is simple because God is faithful. And because Goliath is defying God, the victory will not come from David, but from God. His faith is bigger than his fear. So Saul then takes David and goes, oh, we'll give him the best chance. And he puts Saul's armor on David, trying to equip the boy for what will surely be his death. But David has no interest in armor. The armor doesn't fit. David's ready to leave it behind. He sees only through faith. God's kingdom works like this often. We see a problem. We try all the ways to fix it that we've tried before. And when those don't work, we give up. Our minds have limited. Think of Peter when the soldiers come to arrest Jesus. He pulls out a sword because he thinks the only ways to defeat the power of the world are with the sword. He's like Saul putting his armor on David. Jesus tells Peter to put down his sword. There's a battle, but God's resources stretch far beyond what we can see. So the unconventional things that God can do to win the battle don't occur to us. We have to trust in God. Like disciples in a boat in the midst of a storm, like David walking into battle with a giant whose earthly power far exceeds his own. So David walks into battle with his staff in his hand, and Goliath laughs at him, asking if he's a dog coming to Goliath to play fetch. And then Goliath begins to insult God, telling David he's about to kill him. He's like Herod threatening David with the cross, thinking that Goliath controls life in his hands. Not understanding God's true power, not understanding God's true life. Goliath doesn't know that Jesus has turned death into a gardener, planting seeds that spring up into eternal life. David tells Goliath that his sword and his spear, his javelin, they're all fine. But David comes in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel. And the Lord will deliver Goliath into his hand. The battle is not David's victory, but all will know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's. Goliath is enraged, comes to David. David kills him with a rock from his sling. David's eyes were not filled with fear, but his heart was filled with faith. Goliath couldn't imagine anything more powerful than Goliath. Saul's fear had narrowed his vision and amputated his faith, so Saul couldn't imagine anything more powerful than Goliath either. David saw differently. David understood true power, and so he wasn't afraid. This is just as sin and death, how they were enraged and they came for Jesus, only to discover that Jesus has more power than they could possibly imagine. The disciples couldn't imagine Jesus could survive crucifixion because they were afraid of the Roman army. You and I, we face things in this world that fill us with fear. We often focus on them and our field of vision narrows so that the giants become all that we see. We cannot imagine anything stronger than the giant. We tremble, we feel helpless before the enemy. The Gospels remind our hearts to stand firm in faith. The Gospels tell us that a champion comes to fight for us, a shepherd who steps into the field of battle before the giant to fight the fight that we cannot fight and cannot win on our own. That shepherd has survived the enemy before, and he knows that sin, death, and evil are not ultimate conquerors, for there is a greater power. Again, our strength is not sufficient. But human strength is not the only strength present. Jesus is the new and greater David, the one who fights on our behalf, the one who conquers. When you are afraid and cannot think your way through a problem, take courage, have faith. Like Jesus says to the disciples, where is your faith? Get it out, put it on. Look to the God who delivered David from his giant. When David saw a giant, he remembered what God had done in his past, and it gave him confidence in the God who who saves. It's similar to when God gave the Israelites manna in the wilderness, miraculously feeding them to sustain them through their journey, and they kept some in a jar as a reminder to the people of the miracle that God performed to save them. So they wouldn't forget God's power. This thing had the ability to spark that memory that God saves, that God delivers. And of course, the people forgot. They wondered, what has God done for us lately? We do the same thing. We forget God's faithfulness. We end up panicking because we can't imagine how God will deliver us. But the God who was faithful to deliver David, who was faithful to deliver to the Israelites, who was faithful to deliver the disciples from the storm, is faithful still. The same God with the ability to defeat the giant Goliath can deliver you from the giants you face. That deliverance may look different than you expect it to. That deliverance may look different than what you're asking God for in prayers. But take courage, lose heart. As David says, the battle belongs to the Lord. Think about all those Israelite soldiers. If they were imagining what a victory would look like, would it have looked like David beating Goliath with a sling and a stone? No, it wouldn't have. It would have looked like another soldier coming out. But that's not how it worked. But God delivered them still. Our ultimate hope rests not in our ability to deliver ourselves, but rather in the ability of God to deliver us, in the ability of God to overcome the giants. And the God who parts the seas, the God who calms the storms, the God who raises the dead will deliver us the ultimate victory, overcoming evil with good. You do not face that giant alone. The Lord of hosts goes before you, and the battle belongs to the Lord.